Good afternoon, everybody, and you're all very welcome back to webinar 2 in our series of 3 webinars on rethinking recruitment in a competitive market. This is designed to support your recruitment efforts and help you really stand out as an employer in what we know has become a very competitive marketplace right now. In today's webinar, we're going to be focusing very much on the interviewing to win the candidate, look at the selection process from screening right through to interviewing, and a look at making the offer and managing that contract. Before we begin, though, I'd like to actually cover some few housekeeping elements, just for those of you who weren't with us maybe last week. Please make yourself comfortable and relax. We will be recording today's session and we will be able to send you out a copy of that recording along with the PowerPoint from today's presentation and expert contributors to you after we finish today, and that'll be sent to you on tomorrow. For the benefit of everybody's comfort, we actually have all attendee videos and audios now on mute, but we do welcome you to submit to us any questions that you would like the panel to look at. If we don't have time to cover them today, we'll definitely come back to you on that in the subsequent FAQ or reach out to you directly in that as well, if it's specific to your business. If you do experience any audio difficulties, you're welcome to join using the audio or join the meeting by phone in the details you would have received in your reminder invitation and link to today's session. So as I said, the session is being recorded. We also are, for the benefit of keeping everybody kind of engaged as well, we actually are having a number of poll questions throughout the session. So we will actually invite you to answer those polls, and it gives you a sense of how everybody else is doing in the room and coping with and addressing the challenges that we're all facing. So what will the next hour look like? Well, today is International Women's Day, and a big shout out to all the women in business who are on the call with us today. And we have a powerhouse of women experts on our panel today. So delighted to welcome back Aisling McVeigh to help us look at the marketing and selling of yourself as an employer brand of choice, and looking at this from the point of view of the screening and interview process. We'll then follow that with Natasha Dowd, again back from Ankara, looking at the whole area of planning the interview, from screening right through to the interview process itself, and getting that planning right so that it's right for the candidate as well as you. Then we'll have Caroline Reedy back to us from the HR suite, looking at executing the interview process and asking the right questions, and looking at that as well from the point of view of record management, reference checks, and making the offer and the details of the contract. And finally, then, we're delighted to welcome a new contributor today, Dominica O'Sullivan from Action HR Services, who will look at this whole process from the interviews experience, or from the interview candidates experience, and really give us a different perspective on what it's like on the far side of the table and the chair, and kind of what those interview candidates are feeding back to the likes of Action HR Recruitment Services about what the experience is like and where we could do better. So without further ado, I think we might look to, before we step into the session, we might just look to take our first poll question, please. If I could ask, thank you, if I could ask Aoife to bring that up. So just for the benefit of those joining, just to answer this from your own point of view, what is the average lead time that you tend to have from receipt of an application to inviting for interviews? At 1 to 2 days, 2 to 6 days, 1 to 2 weeks, or it varies? There's no consistency around that. So while we collate the answers to that, I'll now just, for the benefit of those who weren't here last year, just reintroduce you to Aisling McVeigh from the Danube Collective to speak to us more on this role of marketing and employer branding within the selection stage of the recruitment process. And having enjoyed an early career in PR, communications, events and marketing, Aisling worked across industries from hotels to restaurants, in which she developed a real expertise and a fascination with branding, and she subsequently launched then the Danube Collective. She's a wealth of experience in working with businesses large and small, really helping them unravel and uncover and define their employer and their business values, and developing that brand story then, and how you bring that to life in terms of communicating with your audiences to ensure you've consistent messages coming across all your channels, but equally to drive not just reach but engagement with those audiences. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Aisling, but just before I do, Aoife, if we could have the results of that poll question, please. Okay, so it seems the predominant result is that within 2 to 6 days, so within a week of the applications coming in, people are in the main inviting to interview. Some people are choosing a little bit longer, and there's about 20% here there, 1 to 2 days. And then others just haven't a consistent approach in that. And I suppose it will be different for everybody because there's different size businesses. Some have HR functions and some don't. So interesting to see the mix there. But over to you now, Aisling. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Amanda, and welcome everybody today. In this next section, I'm going to be taking you through the marketing and selling yourself as an employer brand of choice. And as we work through, I'd like you to really think about how you're going to try and stand out from everybody else out there who's competing for similar talent. And that's how you become what is that element of employer choice. So let's first take a quick recap on where we started last week and how we're building upon that today. Last week was very much identifying the employer roles that you need, which is the preparation stage, and then of course sourcing, so designing your job advert and picking the communication channels to really gain interest from all of the workforce segment. Then from there, you're receiving all of the applications in. Today, we look at how we're going to screen those, and then, of course, how you select them. And when we look at this screening and selecting aspects coming together, that essentially is what becomes the interview process. When we break the interview process down, there's a couple of key steps that I'd like you to keep in mind as we work through today. So there's obviously reviewing the applications and screening. There'll be the interview preparation. There'll be the actual rapport, so building the rapport again, and how you can use the interview as a touch point to become an employer brand of choice. How you craft your questioning, how you close the interview, and then of course, very, very important, the scoring and the feedback to HR, making sure that we've ticked that box. Next up, we have a picture of a man you'll all be very, very familiar with, Steve Jobs, extremely successful, which was why we're going to hang on one of his quotes, which is, great things in business are never done by one person, they're done by a team of people. So Steve went on to achieve fantastic things, definitely merit in his words. So how can we translate that to the hospitality, travel and tourism industry? It's very much by looking at the interview process from a collaborative approach. And what does this mean for you and your business? It means that we need to look beyond just ourselves in HR or indeed the business owner, and to look and see what other skills are there across the team to help you in the recruitment process. If we look at the select row along the bottom here, we'll have a look and see about the different disciplines and what they each do. HR, for example, may be involved in preparing the interview questions and the scoring, whereas marketing might be involved in evaluating whether a candidate is a good brand fit, and of course preparing that interview sales pitch. But where are we going to interview these people? Well, this is where you're meeting an events team, or if somebody who's in charge of functions in the pub, if they're responsible for asking them for a designated space, tea, coffees, water, so that we're able to actually host these interviews. Then of course operations, they're an integral part of everything that all of our businesses do. How we can involve them by perhaps doing a tour around the property. Again, they'll be involved in the setup very, very heavily, and indeed they might join the interview panel. And then not forgetting IT in this virtual world that we very much live in now, and we've all seen that during the pandemic, how we can involve them in terms of streamlining kind of our registrations and the application piece, and of course managing regret communication and hiring communication after the actual interview itself. So just an example, there are lots more that you can go through there in your own time. Then if we look at the event planning side of it, the exact same steps apply to the interview process as they would any other event, be it a christening for a family, upstairs in your restaurant, if it's an event that you're doing for a corporate or a local social club. You want to define when and where is the interview going to take place, who are the attendees from your side that need to be there and putting the date in their diary. What does the running order look like? What time are you going to start and end? And then that setup that we spoke about, you know, where it's going to be, what you need, how many chairs, tables, all of that. Is there food and beverage? Do you need to serve tea and coffee to people before? You're going to give them lunch after? And then indeed your brand and your organization culture. How can you bring those to life in this event? And that's where it really tasks us to be innovative in our approach. And then of course, invitation and RSVP, the exact same as we would with any other event, how we manage that piece so we know who's actually going to come based on who we've invited. Moving on then to company values. What are these? They essentially are the beliefs at the core of a company strategy. So they really define what it is that we do. And if we look at a couple of examples here, I'll call out two. There are lots, but two key ones that many of you will be familiar with is indeed community. And if we take again, a pub, for example, they may sponsor the local GAA club. That's very much building that value that they place in the local community. The community naturally will socialise with them. And then indeed, they may have some people from the local GAA club who work for them also. Then if we have people first, we might look at a core example on the next slide, and they call this out as one of their values, and it's they place people at the heart of what we do. And that really sees how Accor is all about the people, and you'll hear this a lot. It's all about if we teach and treat our teams well and our employees, they'll be happy in the workplace, and then in turn that they will treat our customer with that extreme warm hospitality that we're all so well known for. And of course, a lovely tagline that they have here as well is that they are a culture of inclusion. So how then do we actually present our employee brand values all throughout the interview process itself? Again, there's lots. I'm just going to call out one for each pillar here. And the most important thing that you remember is considered before, during, and after the actual interview. So one example before the interview, how can you enhance your career landing page on your website? During, you've got two candidates waiting to be interviewed somewhere, and can you send a senior team member to maybe meet and greet them, a lovely touch point? And then afterwards, perhaps you'd like to invite them to stay for a hosted lunch to meet, the chef or somebody from the F&B team, or you might like to offer them a back of house tour so that you can really stick with them and create that memorable experience. It's very important to remember that the sales pitch is not just a sentence that you throw in at the end of the interview. It should really be considered all throughout, before, during, and after. And when you're crafting that sales message, a couple of things to think about really is understand the audience you're speaking to through your research, perhaps draft sample scripts with the help of somebody in marketing. Be authentic. So use your existing team member to share stories, focus on your USPs because they make you different. Be real, of course, find that common ground, and always highlight what you have to offer beyond pay, be it the location and some of the great perks that you have. Let's now look at some real-time examples. W Hotels, fantastic showcase in this space, and what they do is they do a really good job of connecting with the Gen Z audience, and you'll already see on this page how they call it their casting day as opposed to a recruitment event or a recruitment fair. It's already standing out. If you look at the right-hand side here, how this casting day is going to work, it's all about getting energized. There's going to be a resident DJ, a cocktail show. You get the chance to mix and mingle and to express yourself in the audition room while you meet the jury. So again, a really great way of really communicating the brand here and making it kind of fun and energetic to really appeal to that Gen Z audience. On the next slide, you'll see how they bring their brand values to life by showcasing each of the jury members and how they are into each of these elements, from fashion to music and design. And then lastly, TikTok, a big buzzword on the tip of all our tongues, and we're not sure exactly what it is and how we can apply it to ourselves. MBA are doing a great job here, and it's something that I certainly urge a lot of you to go and take a look at and see how they're posting a lot of talent acquisition and recruitment tips on their site, again, to really attract that certain target audience. And with that, I'm going to pass you back to Amanda and wish you all the very best of luck in your recruitment process.
Thanks, Aisling. God, there's some really innovative ways there that you can bring marketing through the selection stage of your interview process. And we have some really also supporting some great tools as well in the resource pack that we have available to you to share after the webinar. So some just great thinking outside the box there to bring to mind. So before I introduce our next contributor, we might just take our second poll, please, Aoife. And the second poll question then is, which of the following recruitment approaches do you use? And we invite you to select all of them that apply to you. So do you arrange to have a chat with the candidate when they express interest, and it's not limited to them having a CV or not? Do you screen the CV and invite the candidate for a chat or a show around or a phone call, screening call? Do you screen the CV internally and then organise a formal interview? Do you do multiple screenings, interviews? Do you use role play exercises or things like that, assessments? And do you do recruitment days and events leading up to interviews and job offers or recruitment campaigns. So any of those that apply, just do let us know for you. And while we collate those responses, I'm going to now introduce again, back to us again this week, Natasha Dowd from Ankara. And Natasha has over 25 years experience in the recruitment industry across Ireland, the UK and the US, with an in-depth understanding of the challenges and demands of the whole area of changing talent marketplace. And her corporate training really spans the whole area of people and service industries across recruitment, HR, learning and development, sales and customer service, and having successfully trained and coached recruitment teams to win talent and deliver year-on-year growth in business targets. So before I hand you to Natasha, can we just take the results of that poll, please, Aoife, if that's all right? Oh, we've hopped to Natasha. So the results of the poll, okay, a lot of people using quite a mix there, but the predominant one seems to be that they screen the CV internally and organise a formal interview. But we are seeing a growing trend there in terms of chatting with the candidate as soon as they express an interest. So not having a CV ready isn't necessarily a barrier for you to meet potential talent. That's really great to see. And closely followed then second place, the CV and the inviting the candidate to an informal chat and show around. So keeping a little bit of this informal as well is not necessarily a bad thing. And about just under 30% they're using recruitment days as well. Okay, so without further ado, I'll hand over to Natasha. Thanks, Natasha.
Thank you, Amanda. Excuse me, good afternoon, everybody. Today I'm going to take you through planning the screening and the interview process. In this next slide, you're going to see an image of the application funnel. And this is when you've received applications through your advertising. And this shows a process of narrowing those applications down and overviewing of candidates and choosing the right candidates to represent you in the role through screening and interviewing and selecting. It's also your opportunity to build relationships with the candidate and show them that you are involved in the whole journey and providing them with a good experience when you are attracting them to your brand. In the next slide, we will look a little bit more at the screening. So what is candidate screening? This is when you need to identify the candidates that meet the role specification that you designed, as well as the job description. And in that role profile, you would have identified competencies and skills. You look to screen candidates, especially at the application process as well as the interview process, and you're looking to screen them in and not out, looking for the must-haves, which are the essentials, and the nice-to-haves, which are the desirable skills. You can also score at this stage, and we'll be looking at that in a little bit more detail shortly, for essential, desired or transferable skills. And those transferable skills would be the ones that maybe somebody's bringing from another sector like customer service, into hospitality, or even from a leadership role, managing talent and bringing new and innovative ideas. But you also need to consider internal applicants at this stage. Look to them because they will be looking for progression and development. It's about you investing in them in the organisation. And also think about who is involved in the application screening process. It may just be human resources, but it's a team and collaboration effort, as Alison mentioned. And in this part, you should also look to see, will the hiring managers be involved in the application screening, or also team members who can tell you about what competencies or skills really work in the role. In this slide now, we're looking at the key content that you put into the role profile specification. You would have specified a competency or a skill which relates to the person or the individual you're looking for. But in the job description, when you transfer that over, that is actually applying that competency or skill in the role itself. As we go to the next slide, which is screening and scoring, when you're looking at the application process, you can identify potential candidates by scoring against the essential, desirable, or transferable skills. As you can see from the screenshot here, we've listed them down, and you have desirable and transferable skills rated at 2. Putting these two on an equal playing field allows you to widen your audience and look at candidates who are bringing transferable skills in from other sectors, and look at them fairly and evaluate equally to decide whether you're going to take them to the next stage, which is the interview. In the next slide, we're looking at best practice structure for the interview. I'm actually just going to briefly look at stage 1. Caroline will be covering the extra stages as we move forward in the slides. And at the interview prep stage, you really should be thinking about who is involved who is going to be involved in the interview, and at what part of the stage of the interview they're going to be involved. How long is the process? Is it 1 interview, 2 interviews? Do you look to have somebody present to you? Will they be doing a role play? Will they be doing a skills test? Also, who is going to be asking the questions and what format will those questions be in and what type of questions they are. Caroline will be looking in more detail at the questions later on. I'm just going to cover them briefly in the next slide. If you have a structured or unstructured interview, it's going to be very important. If you have a structured interview, you are going to be able to have the same questions asked of the same candidates. You will be able to then put them all on an equal playing field and treat them all fairly in what they're being asked. You will also be in control of the process and be able to benchmark and measure the candidates. If the interview is unstructured, it leads to a bit more of a casual conversation. Anybody with transferable skills may not have an opportunity to fairly project themselves well at interview. And in the next slide, you can also then consider what types of interview questions. This slide is downloadable after the session, but you can see that we have here focused on situational, competency-based and behavioural values. When you ask the question, you can actually work on work on the content to gain more information from the candidate, how they've applied in certain situations their competencies and skills. In the next slide, you can also score at interview. This is a very simple process. Caroline is going to actually look at another process where you will actually weight the scoring. But take, for example, one of the competencies for the role was communication. You were looking for someone with strong communication, and you want them to indicate to you how they apply that in a customer service environment, how flexible they are, or what their level of verbal communication is. You will be asking questions once you've decided on what those questions are, for them to display evidence in their answers, and you can see from the list there against each of the indicators. You will then rate them, whether they meet expectations, don't meet expectations, or exceed expectations on a scale of 1 to 3. And be mindful of taking notes throughout the interview. These are important both for the candidate who is going to be looking for feedback so that you can provide them with, but also for you to evaluate candidates consistently and on a level and fair playing field. I'm now going to hand you back to Amanda for the results of the next poll.
Thanks, Caroline. So there's some really great tips there, and it's really clear to see that there's quite a lot of work to be done, you know, in preparing for an interview. And if I think back to my own early career within the hospitality industry, I could always tell straight away, you know, the people who had put in the prep to the interview questions, who had thought it through, and I felt I was getting a much more robust interview and a fairer interview process. So it really is important to put in the time there. So we might, before I move into our next contributor, Caroline, we might actually just take the next poll, please, Aoife, if that's okay. So the question here now is, do you think that open recruitment days and events are an effective way to find the most suitable candidate? So is that a case of yes for operational roles that are seasonal and temporary, yes for all roles, no you don't find it effective, or maybe you're not sure, maybe you've never used them as such to date? So while we collate the results of that, I'll just introduce Caroline Reedy back again from the HR suite. Caroline joins us again this week to step us through the all-important interview itself, getting those questions right and managing the record of the interview and the paper trail to ensure that our selection process and decision and offer is robust. And really, there's no better person placed to talk about interview questions than the woman who's written the book called The Art of Asking the Right Questions, a really excellent practical toolkit for all people managers, and ensures you can maximize the people talent, and that offers some great tips and guidance for anybody managing not only recruitment but appraisals and personal development too. For those who haven't met Caroline before, she's Managing Director of the HR Suite, a HR and employment law expert firm. She's a former member of the Low Pay Commission, and she's also an adjudicator in the Workplace Relations Commission, with expertise as a trainer, presenter, keynote speaker, expert investigator, and trained mediator. So before I hand over to Caroline to step us through that all-important interview and getting the questions right, we might take the results of this poll now, please. Aoife. So do you think that open recruitment days and events are an effective way? 39% of you saying yes for seasonal and temporary roles, 99% saying for all roles, and then about 36% of you have never used them. So maybe for those of you who haven't used them, it might be worthwhile reaching out to people who have and seeing how they find them. You know, is there innovative ways like Aisling was suggesting, in ways that you can bring in people to those recruitment days and get them excited and give them a sense and a feel for the culture and the employer values you have. And then about 16% of you are saying, no, that you don't think it's an effective way. And maybe it's not for some smaller businesses, where you haven't got the resources to put against a recruitment campaign and a recruitment day in that effect. So we'll move on then. And Caroline, maybe hand over to you now to take us through the all-important interview itself and getting those questions right.
Great, thanks Amanda, and delighted to be with you all this afternoon, and some great topics and great speakers so far. Hope you're all finding it really helpful. So I'm going to focus very much on the interview itself and the importance of building really good rapport and giving a really positive experience to the candidate. So when they leave, they're saying, I really want to work here. It seems like a brilliant place to work. But at the same time, we need to ask the really important questions and get a really good sense and feel if the candidate is the right fit for us. And we would have spoken in webinar 1 about hiring for attitude and training for aptitude. And that's what we're going to focus on now as we talk about building the rapport at the interview and now proceeding on to ask the right questions. So the importance of giving time to identify what are the right questions to ask and being consistent in your approach. Here are some really good examples of some competency-based and behavioural interviews. And you've got a suite from the toolkit of interview questions to pull from, depending on the skills you're trying to identify. And once you identify the question, that's going to give you a really good insight from the candidate based on their past experience or their life experience in answering that question. So if I move on then to other questions, so it's really important that you put the candidate at ease by asking them some comfortable introductory questions, like tell us a little bit about yourself, what relevant experience have you for the role, why did you choose this opportunity, and then you can add on by probing a little bit further, especially for more nervous candidates who mightn't be as talkative, to ensure you get an opportunity to probe their experience. Avoid multiple choice unless you really feel it's relevant, and make sure that you ask them questions in relation to how it links to the tourism industry, because there's a huge amount of transferable skills. For example, if they've worked in retail, if they've worked in other industries that mightn't be specific, but there's transferable learnings we can take from how they answer those questions. And then there's really good questions like what kind of decisions are most difficult for you to make. So again, we get a bit of insight into the candidate. The question you ask is going to depend on the role and on the level within the organisation, but it's important that you also avoid closed questions, leading questions, or double-headed questions where the candidate is going to be more confused and you don't necessarily achieve anything good from those types of questions unless you have a very specific purpose. So key to really spend time deciding the questions, scripting those, and making sure the recruitment manager has those within the interview form for the different roles. So if we move on then, the difference between interviewing a candidate who has experience and maybe younger candidates who are just out of school, for example. Remember, we've got to be consistent for the job role, but we can ensure that we've tailored the questions to suit the role. So ensure you've read the CV and you show that. So saying things like, I see you have an interest in football, for example. Have you any examples of a time that you had a challenging scenario as part of a team? In that scenario, for example, if they haven't worked previously, might be a good way of showing them your knowledge of their CV, but also using competency-based questions to assist them in relation to transferable skills. For experienced candidates, then you can probe a little bit further. So remember, this is a two-way selling experience, and from right throughout these 3 webinars, it's very much focused on selling your business and your role to the candidate as much as us selecting the best candidate. And remember, they're going to ask you questions, so be prepared. Things like, for example, what's your culture like? What's the management style like? What can they expect in terms of training and development? So have those questions prepared, and if they ask you, super, and if they don't, you should use that opportunity to sell your culture and your company to them if they don't ask. So lots of questions to be considered as we move on to the next slide. And the next slide is very much focused on the interview assessment form. And you'll have heard us all talk about the importance of keeping a paper trail and being able to give feedback. So make sure that you have a scoring matrix. For example, here we've done it out of 5, and we've given you an interview assessment form as part of the toolkit to complement today's webinar. So keep your paper trail in case candidates come back and ask for feedback. Reference checking often is something, because we're so in need of the candidate, that we sacrifice in terms of time. And it's really important that we manage candidates from when they apply as promptly and as quickly as we can through the process, but try and not avoid the reference check process. And this can be a housekeeping thing that you do early to get all the details from the candidates. So when you're ready to make an offer, you've got their details. But it's really important you check what are their strengths, what are their areas for development, and would you recommend the candidate for this role? And you'll often remember from doing reference checks, any of you that have, it's what's not said is as important as what's said. So make sure that you do your reference checks. And remember, references are available as part of the data access request from an employee if they request feedback afterwards. So hopefully at this stage, we're now ready to make a verbal offer. And the verbal offer is trying to sell to the candidate what the role and benefits are. And you're really selling the culture, you're selling the benefits in terms of the pay and terms and conditions. And you're hoping at that stage that you're offering a competitive package that the candidate is going to accept. But remember the implications of the market at the moment, and just be careful that you're not impacting, for example, other terms and conditions for other employees, or you're not moving outside the range that you have that might impact others. So that's something I think you need to think about as you're looking at that offer stage, because it's got hugely competitive, as you all know now. So then once you've done the verbal offer, you're going to make the formal offer in writing. And once the formal offer in writing has been verbally accepted, you're going to do their contract of employment. And it's a legal obligation that all employees receive their 5 core terms within 5 days of starting. And then they get their contract of employment to be issued within 2 months of starting. And again, it's really important because this avoids any grey area as well as being a legal obligation. So everybody knows what they're signing up to. Expect feedback. It's likely that you're going to have candidates who come back, particularly for senior positions, to ask why they didn't get the role. Really make sure you give honest feedback based on the interview records that you've kept, so that you're going to be in a position to stand over that in case anybody takes it further. So give clear, honest feedback in a timely way so that the candidates see the process has been transparent and the best candidate got the job. And the paper trail in HR is so important. So keep your interview record, screening form, keep your all information for up to 12 months. When a candidate can come back and claim to have had an issue with the role, they may say, look, I didn't get the role because of my age, because of my gender, because of my nationality, etc., as you saw from webinar 1. So your paper trail is what's going to back that up. So your contract is the key legal agreement you have with yourself and your employee. It's a detailed legal document. We've given you a sample template to use that you can tailor to suit your property. And again, remember, as we outlined, it's a legal obligation that you give to everybody, and the contract should be tailored to suit you and your type of role. So for example, a fixed term contract or a full-time contract, depending on the role that is available. And make sure you sell and include the benefits. So the things that have come up as part of the Fall to Ireland survey with candidates is they want to know they're going to get their breaks, they want to know what's happening with uniforms, they want to know what they're receiving in terms of pay and premiums, and then make sure you promote any other benefits like meal allowance or discount, etc., so that you use that offer and that contract for the candidate to make sure that they choose you over any other potential offers they may have. And it's important to have all these documents ready so that they can be done in a timely way. And once the offer hopefully is going to be effective, you're going to make sure you've sold the role to the candidate and you've been clear in relation to what's on offer. And finally, I'm going to pass you back over to Amanda on that note to introduce poll number 4 to you. So thank you very much for listening.
Thanks, Caroline. Some great advice there. And actually, Caroline, just before we lose you off camera, just have a quick question that's come in from somebody there. How many reference checks should you perform for a candidate? That's coming in from Liam.
I think if you have a new, somebody who's coming from school, it's likely to be a coach in a football team, or it's going to be the principal or a teacher. And I think 1 is fine for that level. But if it's somebody who's more experienced, I'd always do 2. Oftentimes we end up with a candidate who's unsuitable for a role and ends up failing probation. And when we do the reference check, we find out, it hasn't been done, or there was really red flags flagged at that stage. So they are really important, Amanda. And I think
so kind of 2, and would you go to 3 maybe for senior roles around that?
I think if the person hasn't been with the roles very long, I'd always do the most recent one, and I'd also be very conscious of any gaps in the CV as well. If somebody, for example, had a year of a gap after a role, I'm more likely to do why do they have a gap, and that's something you'll obviously probe in the interview to understand. But use the reference also.
You'll validate it outside, yeah. Okay, great. Thanks, Caroline. Okay, so we'll go to a 4th poll now before I introduce our next contributor. And the 4th poll, please, if we can have it on screen, Aoife. Do you keep a record of the assessment carried out when screening and interviewing candidates? And this is what Caroline was there talking about. Yes, we have a formal record of all applications and candidates, so it leaves you in a good position if they come back for queries or feedback. Yes, we have a formal record for certain senior role candidates. Yes, I have notes, or no, I remember everything they told me, or no, I don't keep records. So while you collate your answers on that, I'll now introduce our 4th contributor today, introducing Dominica O'Sullivan from Action Recruitment HR Services Division. As a CIPD qualified and experienced HR consultant, her role involves her in cutting-edge HR and recruitment solutions to offer client organisations the confidence to manage and grow their business. And Dominica is no stranger to the challenges of recruitment and selection. She commenced her hospitality career with Hilton Worldwide in a range of HR positions, including HR manager for the Conrad Dublin, recruitment specialist for Hilton Worldwide Ireland Hotels, and she also worked as a HR manager for Choice Hotels Ireland and the Delata Hotel Group. And in a separate role, she led jointly led the recruiting of over 600 staff in the preparation and reopening of Adair Manor Resort in 2017. No mean feat that. So having previously worked with Action Recruitment in 2021, she was delighted to return as HR lead for Action's HR Services Division. So before I pass to Dominica, Aoife, can we have the results of the poll, please? So about 42% of you saying you have good formal records. Others are saying you have it for some saying I have notes. No, I remember everything they told me, and that's fine until, as Caroline said, they can come back up to a year down the road and ask for clarity as to why they didn't get the role. And no, I don't keep records. A very risky business there for 11% of you. So maybe that is something that you could revisit coming out of today's webinar. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Dominica, who's going to really talk us through what this whole interview and selection process feels like from a candidate's perspective, because she's dealing with them every single day. Some really interesting insights coming up here. So Dominica, over to you.
Thank you for the introduction, and good afternoon, everyone. I'm delighted to be able to share some insights from the candidate's perspective. And I'll start by saying that recruitment process has evolved significantly in the last number of years. And this also relates to candidates' expectations in terms of speed and efficiency of the decision-making process in terms of their application being considered. They're expecting that the decision on the application is going to be made fast. And to help us to get into a frame of mind of where we can make improvements to our current process, we need to start thinking about candidate experience, similarly to our guest or a customer experience. And to help you get some insight into what this feedback could be at the moment, I invite you to have a look at Indeed and Glassdoor and some Google reviews, where you might see what the people that interviewed for a job with your organization have said, or indeed the current or past employees are saying about what it is like to work in your organization. So it's very important to say that candidates are acting like consumers nowadays, and they really do take their time to research and go onto those websites. So it's really important to be aware of what is being said in there and potentially respond to some of the reviews as well. When we're talking about recruitment process, at the moment, there is a significant increase for demand for employees from outside of Ireland, and they're being recruited remotely at the moment. And I wanted to speak specific about seasonal workers. So in certain parts of Europe, we would have employees who work only on a seasonal basis from April to the end of September. However, when an employer in Ireland receives their CV, they make an assumption that those people are actually not able to stay in employment for longer than 6 months, whereas in fact they are genuine seasonal workers and therefore shouldn't be discounted based on that. So we're going to move on to pre-screening process now. So for the phone screening has been embraced by a lot of employers at this stage, and it's fantastic because it is a great tool to use. However, as opposed to entice, engage and sell, we hear that a lot of employers are taking an opportunity to treat it as a quick fire buzzer round, and therefore take the opportunity to ask loads and loads of questions as opposed to focus on the experience. Other frustrations that we are hearing the candidates are having is lack of information about the structure of the recruitment process. So exactly how many interviews are going to take place and who are they going to be meeting, and are there other activities involved as well. So it's important to make a decision on that at the start of the process and communicate it to candidates so they know what to expect. Technology is allowing us to deliver this webinar today, and it's fantastic, and video interviews are really popular nowadays. The only aspect I'm going to recommend that you consider is be flexible with the channel that you're using. So if, for example, your company uses Zoom, be prepared to jump on a WhatsApp video call or Skype, because in certain countries, employees are not as familiar with all those pieces of software. In addition, for preparation, in terms of preparation for the face-to-face interview, I recommend that you put yourself in candidate shoes and walk the candidate journey. So from the time they're opening the door of your establishment, who are they welcomed by? What is being said to them? Where are they being sat? Is anybody engaging with them? And is the interview going to take place on time? Because all of that is going to give you some great insights on the improvement you might be able to offer. So we're going to move on to the interviews themselves and the feedback we gather from the candidates. So what we see candidates respond really well to is creativity of the format. So yes, questions are extremely important. However, what candidates respond really well to is assessment days, role plays, job-related activities, and show rounds back and front of house. And to make a reference to other speakers that went before me, knowing the CV is really important, and letting the person show that you know the CV by picking a specific piece of information, for example, a hobby, and taking it as a point of discussion. In terms of basics, candidates expect that you're going to respect their time, that you're going to be hospitable, and that the interview is not going to turn into an interrogation, which would you believe is still happening these days, that they're going to be asked interesting and relevant questions, and that there is going to be an exciting story about what it's like to work for the organization told to them during the interview. In terms of another helpful piece of information I wanted to share with you today, it's discussion about the motivation for the move in anticipation of a counter offer. If you have that conversation at the interview stage, you can then if a counteroffer is extended, make a reference to it and remind the candidate about their motivation and therefore help them make the right decision. In terms of closing of the interview, candidates want to have an opportunity to be allowed to ask questions. They also want to ensure that the salary is being discussed, and that's why it's important that you initiate that conversation, because sometimes they don't feel like it's appropriate for them to do so, and that you tell them about when the next steps are happening and what exactly they are going to be. So as I said, timeliness of the process is really an expectation these days, and therefore making a decision on whether the candidate is successful or not should happen fast. So some employers are making conditional offers of employment. So for example, subject to references. And while it's not the advice that we would give, some employers are stepping away from references altogether to speed up the process. We also have candidates walking away from the recruitment process because of the offer that is being extended to them. So recently we had a candidate who was vocal about what it is that they were looking for. However, the offer that came back was exactly the same as what they currently had, and the responsibilities were increased, and they decided to walk away, indeed being quite offended by this offer being extended. So what we see works really well is when a phone call is made to a candidate to excitedly offer them the position, and then very shortly after, written piece of information is extended to them, and that's, for example, your offer letter or the contract. And then treatment of candidates who haven't got the job is really important from the employer branding perspective, and a common courtesy, obviously. So you can have templates to respond to people or have a software that might be able to allow you to do that. But remember that those candidates can leave reviews and therefore deter future applicants from applying for a position because of their bad experience with the process. And what we see, especially for the senior positions, there is an increase of candidates wanting to know how they got on during the process, if they didn't get the job, why that was. And that's why it's fantastic if you're skilled and experienced to deliver this feedback, because it is very well received despite a regret. Okay. So in terms of post-offer communication, what the candidates are expecting is that this communication is going to be continuous and that it is going to be proactive. So starting with a phone call once the verbal and written offer has been received, to explain the terms and conditions. For people from outside of Ireland, explained the legal terms because they might be unfamiliar, and we actually noticed that it is a source of some confusion for people from abroad. So take your time to address all those concerns and start building excitement about the whole process. In terms of communication for getting the employee to come to Ireland, helping with booking of flights and accommodation is really important and very well received, and also getting them to familiarize themselves in relation to the realities of living in Ireland. So have a getting set up in Ireland document that you can send to them after the offer has been accepted. And what we also see, candidates are expecting some help with getting the PPS number and setting up a bank account. And what's really setting some employers apart from others is creating excitement about the onboarding process and continuously communicating it with the employee until they actually reach the destination. Thank you for your time, and I'm delighted to pass you back to Amanda now.
Thanks very much, Dominica. Some really interesting insights there. And I suppose it does really challenge our thinking when we start to put ourselves in the candidate's shoes and see what it's been like for them. So how long have they waited for you to contact them? What's it like coming through the door? Who's there to meet and greet? You know, and I think that's a very valuable point as well you've made about we need to raise the issue around salary expectations and discuss what's the values and the importance to them, so that we're making an offer that's realistic to expectations and not insulting, but also then that actually we can really understand what they value within the process and what they're looking for in terms of career moves. So some great insights there. So we're going to go now to audience questions, and just as we get those organised, I'm going to actually start the ball rolling with one for Caroline, because Caroline, I've been hearing a good bit of conversation from some employers about important legislative updates that are coming down the track or that are just in this year that have implications for contracts, terms and conditions in 2022 and beyond. So will you tell us a little bit more about this, please? And I think you have just a slide for us on this. Yeah, thank you.
I suppose there's been so much legislation in the last 18 months that people will be aware of that has come into play. And we've a new updated minimum wage that came into effect from January of this year for anybody who's on minimum wage. There's also talk of the new pensions legislation that's going to be coming. And again, we're going to keep people updated as that evolves. Statutory sick pay, we have a bill, and it was hoped that that would be coming in from the 1st of January, but it's going to be 3 days for 2022 for all employees with more than 13 weeks service, which is what is proposed. But again, that's just at bill stage. And then probably one of the ones that's probably most topical for the industry is the TIPS legislation that has come into effect, which means that we must display in all establishments what our policy in relation to TIPS is, and also that any tips or gratuities that are received can't be added on to the employees' wages to bring them up or top them up in terms of the minimum wage. So there needs to be clarity in relation to how we manage tips and gratuities within the industry.
Great, Caroline, thanks for that. And I suppose, that is a very valid point in terms of that updated minimum wage. Like, we talk about minimum rates of pay, but then there's the living wage. And I think, going back to what we were talking about last week in the first webinar, I think we really need to look out at what comparable industries are actually offering as well. I think it's fair to say we're seeing quite a lot in retail now, starting rates with no experience that is well above the minimum rates of pay for our industry. So we just need to be mindful of that, really, if we are going to attract that talent into the business. I think we need to be in keeping with the competitor rates.
Absolutely. And I think as well, it's about managing the package. A lot of clients now are looking at things like a 3-day week, yet you do all your hours in the 3 days and still get the right rest breaks, to again have flexibility as an added advantage, or other terms and conditions. So it's making sure you've got the best package suiting the job and you're considering all of those elements to it.
Yeah, that's a great point, actually, and it really plays to what Natasha was talking about last week then as well, in terms of playing to, I suppose, the values and the importance that people play in different aspects of what they're looking for in terms of needs and motivations. Are people seeking career advancement, or is it around that kind of flexibility and the fact that I can earn a full-time wage week but actually have some more flexible days to spend with family or friends, or to pursue other things? So I think it really is important to go back to what Natasha was highlighting to us in the first webinar, and be creative in thinking about that. So just some more questions then in from the audience, and one I have here for Natasha, a great one here from a small visitor attraction. Natasha, a candidate is due to come for interview next week, and they've asked me for some details about the type of questions they'll be asked. How much do I tell them?
I think being transparent as much as possible with the candidate, so that they can prepare well and they can present themselves in the best light. There's no real agenda to hide anything for the interview process. It's about making sure it's as transparent as possible.
And I suppose the more prepared they are, the better, as you say, those transferable skills can shine, the more comfortable they are in the interview process, and it just leads to a kind of a better performance all around. So, you're not the other side of the table feeling you're kind of having to drag information from the candidate, but they can actually be more considered and have thought through their responses and have kind of maybe got over a sense of some of the nerves. Aisling, a really good one here just in, and this is going to really challenge you. How do you improve interview attendance? Some employers here are noting that there can be as low as 10% turnout to interviews. So, you know, is that about some of the things that Dominica was talking about? Do you think in terms of keeping the communications, you know, really tight before they come in, making sure they're made feel welcome, making sure that you're waiting to meet them? But is there other kind of innovative things that you're seeing, you know, the likes of W Hotels, or what could a small business do, Aisling, to kind of excite people to get more of a response in the door?
I think, like anything, when we went through how you approach the actual event setup of it, it's that invite and RSVP piece that I think is really crucial. So it's not just kind of giving people a time slot and expecting that they turn up. It's managing that really, really tightly, as you would if you were managing your restaurant and covers. There's no leeway there for losing out on a table of 6 people. You manage that really, really closely. So that's a big thing. And then I think it's making the day or the actual interview itself seem attractive. Yeah, exactly. And we saw that with W, you know, how they talked about the cocktail show. Instead of using the word network, they use mix and mingle. There's a DJ. Not saying that everybody has to do that at all, but just thinking how you can make it attractive for them coming down. And if you are somewhere small and perhaps, you know, offering a toasty and a cup of tea, it's not going to impact your bottom line too much. You know, a little thing like that can have a huge difference. You know, offering somebody to maybe the opportunity to stay for that afterwards might improve the draw.
Yeah, fair point. I mean, I think, you know, none of us would take a wedding invitation and not RSVP to it. So as you said, the more you formalize that process and make it seem important, the more, I suppose, there's an implication for the candidate just not to show up, you know. So you're demonstrating you're invested in them, and then there's a kind of a shared ownership and responsibility, I think, around that, isn't there?
Absolutely, and that the sales pitch is built into that as well, and not just in the interview.
Yes, exactly. And Dominica's nodding her head furiously on that. Dominica, a question here, a very honest one from a business line manager who says, in my current role, I'm not the sole decision maker when it comes to making the offer, and this may cause delays in the process. Can you give us any advice on how to overcome that?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think that based on the feedback that we have shared today from candidates specifically, what is really important for them, it is vital to bring it up to the attention of the decision makers and tell them that any delays, unnecessary delays in the process, can result in losing out on the candidate. And therefore, there is an element of upward management, but based on the data that is obviously coming from the industry, like the one shared today.
Okay, great answer. And I suppose it does reflect what Chris was saying last week as well. You know, the process has speeded up and we're going to have to get with it. You know, if you're not up, you stand to lose the candidate, because chances are they're having 3 or 4 other interviews in that same day or same week. So, you know, pause and you could miss the opportunity. Caroline, one final one in here from the audience for you. As the published author on the art of asking the right questions, does your book reveal the answer onto what is the best interview question to ask and why?
I suppose for me, the 2 key things is that attitude. Are they going to be the right culture fit? And I think any of the competency questions to get an insight into the candidate. And like that, you're going to get loads of opportunity to test that by preparing. And I think any of the questions you've asked today, the great thing about these webinars are you can go in now and prepare. Do all the good things, like whether it's the branding, preparing the ads, preparing the interview questions, preparing the offer. And if you've all those lined up, you've got a very good high chance of success and a speedy process. So I think for me, asking those type of questions to get the personality of the person and the culture fit would be my top kind of question that I focus on.
Great answer. And I suppose from my point of view, I can say as a past HR manager, when you put in that groundwork, you kind of have it done, embedded in for future. So it's not revisiting the process every time. It's just building on that as different roles come up. So look, thank you so much to all of you for great insights today. Fantastic panel of speakers, really rich insights. There's so much more that you've given us, but we've put those materials in the resources that will support today's webinar. So please, to everybody, we will be communicating communicating with you tomorrow and giving you access to those. They will be sitting on our business support hub. So, you know, we've a lot of, hopefully, the hard work done for you, even in terms of ideas on question types to ask and things like that. But I think, Fiona, if we could just pull back up the slides, please. I just maybe would like to step through just some key takeaways from today. And while we do that, I might just remind everybody that we have the third of our webinars coming up actually next week, which will focus very much about onboarding process and how to actually ensure that that gets managed in a very effective way so that people are bedded into the process, they feel part of the culture, and they can become very effective team members very quickly. So just recapping, I suppose, on today and the key messages from the contributors, I think it's fair to say the recruitment and selection process has evolved, the pace is faster, and we must adapt and get with the programme and move at that pace if we are to actually win some of that talent. I think, just to Ashling's point, the marketing and selling of your employer brand credentials within this process is key. We need to think outside the box. We need to aim to stand out. We need to dare to be different and really help candidates connect and see you as an employer brand of choice. So consider every single touch point that you can weave your employer brand sales pitch in throughout the interview process, whether it's having somebody there to meet and greet, whether it's how you set up that interview process, whether it's offering the background, back of house tour, whether it's inviting them for a chat with one of the team members over a cup of coffee. All of those touch points can influence how you show up and how you're seen as an employer brand of choice. The third area then is consider and critique your process from the candidate's perspective. So speaking to Dominica's point, put yourself in the candidate's shoes. Look out for that feedback, watch out for it, and respond to the candidate reviews as well. So ask your current and your past staff what the process is like. Speed and efficiency and professionalism, I think, are really key within the process. We're seeing that. It's a common thread throughout these webinars, and the candidate communications are really important to help you win. So consider the before and the during and the after. Respect the candidate's time and don't leave them hanging for answers, and keep them informed if there is any delays in the process as well. Just stay close to them. And even to Dominica's point, staying close to them after the offer and after they accept, and just make sure until they're in the door and settled, you can't be sure that they're not looking elsewhere and having an eye to elsewhere. So you need to stay very close to them. Allowing them then time, allowing yourself and your team time to consider and look at the right questions, and keeping really consistent records on that is really important. Scoring the candidate against the matrix, guiding the candidate in terms of the format of the interview, and helping them prepare for the interview is really, really key. Making prompt decisions in your selection process and communicating that effectively, not just to the successful, but equally to the unsuccessful. Because if I understand why I'm unsuccessful, it doesn't necessarily mean that I'll negatively tarnish your brand with what I'm saying about the interview process, but I will be more accepting of the fact that I just wasn't the right fit for this role, but it won't necessarily have a negative impact going on. So remember the unsuccessful candidates as much as the successful candidates. And then finally, staying in contact throughout the process, as I said, right up to and after the offer and the acceptance stage, until they're in the door and started with you and onboarded, which we'll be talking about, of course, next week. So just next week then, just to flag to you as well, the additional support to this webinar will be available tomorrow on our Business Support Hub. We'll drop you communications on that. And not to forget the other upcoming support programs we have scheduled on our Business Support Hub. These range from everything like digital sales and marketing, revenue generation, all of those areas. And these are all fully subsidised by Fáilte Ireland and available to you now to access, and for your teams to access and invest time in before the season gets too busy. So please do check those out on our Business Support Hub. And finally, a reminder to you all to thank you for attending today, but also to say our third webinar in the series, looking at the whole area of onboarding effectively from newcomer to an effective team performer. This will happen next Tuesday at 3 o'clock, and we look forward to welcoming you back for that again. So finally, just to say thank you so much for your time to be with us today. We do hope there's plenty of food for thought. We look forward to actually talking with you again next week. And from all of us here in Fáilte Ireland, have a good afternoon and bye for now.